So just to put in context the relative size of capital that we've plotted, the telecoms industry generates about 2 trillion in revenue, and it varies year to year, but across fixed and mobile, invests around 350 billion in capital. A lot of that in the radio access network, but all across the network, OSS and BSS, pretty large. The 3 big hyperscalers in 2019 invested around 54 billion in their cloud, principally in cloud compute, and obviously some of that is flowing towards the edge, but a lot of that remains in their hyperscale activities. And then from what we have been able to pick up, just to put it in context, over a 4-year period, and the other 2 are annual, so this is over a 4-year period from 2016 to 2020. It's not exhaustive, but it gives you an order of magnitude of the kind of level of investments that we have managed to track and sort of trace going into edge computing. Comes in at about 2 billion. So we're still very early in terms of what we are seeing in terms of the capital markets attracting funding from the capital markets into edge computing, despite it being quite an area that is considered to be quite highly hyped, I suppose. So if we dig down into that 2 billion and look at the areas that Dalia outlined across that value chain with the facility working upwards, we can see that over half of that we believe is going into facilities, and that's companies, as Dalia mentioned, Vapor, Compass, Edge Micro, EdgePoint Systems. And then cloud infrastructure is the other major sort of sector. Docker, D2iQ, Litmus, and so on are picking up investments. And then the third sort of bucket, applications and software, C3AI, Crosser, Golem, Iguazia, and so on, have picked up funding. Now, this is sort of fresh capital as opposed to M&A. We've seen quite a lot of acquisition, particularly in the facilities area. Recently, I think just yesterday, Bell Canada, Equinix, I think, announced the acquisition of 13 data centers in Bell Canada. There have been other large investment M&A. We haven't counted that as fresh new capital coming into the year, but we do recognize and we do track in the ecosystem. All this is kind of built off a spreadsheet that we've been tracking and using in terms of a tool for tracking investments and what's happening in the sort of edge ecosystem. If we drill down a little bit more into those facilities and where they are, Dalia outlined the kind of regional, then the network, and then the kind of tower. This is not in order. We perhaps should be moving from left to right or right to left. You can see that the first stage in terms of moving from the center and the hyperscale is to the region. We picked up about a billion of facilities that are being invested in at the regions. A lot of that is being driven, at least in part, by the hyperscalers themselves. So, and some of those regional data centers are pretty big, and you could argue, well, actually, they're really hyperscale. And certainly a lot of them, I think, are at least securing anchor tenants in the form of the hyperscalers, and then looking for additional sales of facilities and compute to enterprises. And then if you go further on down into the network and to the tower with Vapor and so on, it's much smaller. From what we can see, much smaller. So at the moment, the big monies have clearly been going into hyperscale cloud compute. It's moving down towards the regional, and it's still very early days in terms of the network and the tower, and that is often quite small funding for Series A kind of funding levels for startups, particularly at that level.